Big week coming up, and there's a lot of buy low opportunities. You know why you're here, so let's get into it. Make sure to please just go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. That's all I ask today. So going into our first guy right here, this guy I particularly think, let's just step away from week 7 craziness, right? This guy didn't play in week 7. I think it's the right time to buy CeeDee Lamb in fantasy. I think CeeDee Lamb is a great buy low trade target. So let's just look at CeeDee Lamb for the majority on the whole of the 2024 season. As of right now, he is the wide receiver 15 in a half PPR format, and he's averaging 12.7 fantasy points per game. That's obviously a far cry from what we got last year from CeeDee Lamb, making him the number 1 wide receiver in most people's drafts this year. So basically, people who picked CeeDee Lamb, they were either picking the first overall pick, the second overall pick, the third overall pick. A top 3 pick is what it took to get CeeDee Lamb in these fantasy football drafts. And basically for the entire season, he's done nothing but overwhelm. His best game came in week 4 versus the Giants when he had 20.1 fantasy points in a half PPR format. So CeeDee Lamb has been pretty disappointing, right? Now, here's the reason I believe right now is the time to trade for him. So, obviously, with CeeDee Lamb, he's the number 1 wide receiver in Dallas. Nobody really doubts that up to this point, right? I think what people are doubting is his effectiveness in this offense after being paid. Like, why isn't it coming to fruition? You would think he'd want to be, putting up everything that he can to ensure the Cowboys that they paid the right amount of money for this dude. And it just hasn't happened. But here's the thing. When you look at the last 3 games with targets, 8 targets, 9 targets, 14 targets, the targets aren't what has gone away from CeeDee Lamb. Since week 4, he just hasn't scored another touchdown here. Now, it's worthy to note that they've also played some opponents and some pretty decent ones. Like the Lions, that was an opportunity that he just didn't hit on. The Steelers was a decent opportunity, and the Giants was obviously an opportunity that he was able to take advantage of. But here's what you've got coming up in the next several weeks here for CeeDee Lamb into a very critical time for the fantasy season, mind you. The 49ers on week 8, that's not the greatest matchup. The Atlanta Falcons, very good matchup. The Eagles again, the Texans, the Commanders, the Giants, the Bengals, the Panthers, and the Bucks in week 16. So this last stretch of the fantasy season specifically is where you're wanting to get CeeDee Lamb for. This is around playoff time, right before playoffs, and into the fantasy playoffs. And I just don't think that you can wait on this one. I think if you're going to get CeeDee Lamb, you've got to attack him now. Coming off the bye week, he's been pretty underwhelming, and I think that you can go in there and try to send somebody like a Terry McLaurin, who I like a lot, but I think you could try to send him. I think you could try to send a guy like Garrett Wilson over towards CeeDee Lamb owner, because I believe that the inability for CeeDee Lamb to capitalize on what we know he can do this year has definitely been a headline that people have been following. And CeeDee Lamb, I think just the opportunities are great, and you just can't wait on this one when you're talking about CeeDee Lamb, because the moment that he has another 20-point game, it's over. You can't trade for him anymore, and it's been several weeks. I think you have a unique opportunity to do this right now. The next guy I want to get into had a atrocious week in week 7, Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith, really, for the most part, it's obviously been a little disappointing because he missed the game versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. But if you actually just take out that Bucks game and take out the Giants game, he's been really good in fantasy. 11.9 points in half PPR week 1, 17.1, 11.4, and 13.9 right off the bye week. So again, he's had one really good game and just a couple decent games in fantasy football that are going to keep your team afloat. So obviously, what happens in week 7 is an absolute disaster. It's an atrocious performance. He was not involved. Like, it just wasn't there. 2 targets, 1 catch for -2 yards after A.J. Brown just went off for a massive game versus the Giants, and the Eagles crushed the Giants in this game. Why wasn't Devonta Smith more involved? I understand the concerns because I think a lot of it personally leads back to Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts definitely has a lot of concerns right now because he only seems to be wanting to supply 1 wide receiver. You can't take that just for 1 week and apply it broadly to the whole season because, again, A.J. Brown, when he's played, he's been spectacular. And Devonta Smith has performed right there with him up until this point right here. And again, specifically over the next month, Devonta Smith's going to go off. Cincinnati, week 8, Jacksonville, week 9, Dallas, week 10, and Washington, week 11. Those are fantastic matchups to have as a wide receiver in fantasy football. And again, this is just the time that you want to get somebody like a Devonta Smith, because you're not going to be able to trade for him after this next month. This next month of fantasy, I would be shocked if he doesn't have at least two 20-point games in fantasy football. Everything's lining up for Devonta Smith for the next month of fantasy football. And maybe after that, you want to revisit, like maybe if your trade deadline hasn't passed, sending him away. But I think that right now, you're in a position where you could probably get Devonta Smith in exchange for like a Jackson Smith and Jigba, possibly a Wan'Dale Robinson type, or even a Michael Pittman type. Like, I think there's an avenue here to get a Devonta Smith on your team after a really, really bad week in what was a great opportunity. But I do believe that based on the next month and just the way it's gone with Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, like Jalen Hurts all of a sudden didn't forget that Devonta Smith played for the Eagles. It was just an off game. Devonta Smith, good trade target this week as well. Now, our next guy right here, I think it's really time to have this discussion as well. People are starting to get worried about James Cook over in Buffalo. Now, to be clear, James Cook is the running back 13 on the year. So it's not like he's all of a sudden just an absolute disaster for your team. And it's not like he's costing you weeks or anything like that. And on top of that, he was like a third, fourth round pick, depending on the platform that you were playing on and the particular scoring style that your league possesses. So James Cook has been pretty good. 14.7 fantasy points per game through the first 7 weeks of the season. He's been a really good player. He's still got the efficiency numbers. 4.2 yards per carry is what he's averaging. But let's look at the game log specifically, because just looking at the first 3 weeks, I thought James Cook was going to be a top 5 back this year. Those first 3 weeks, he had 19 attempts on the ground, week 1, 11 and 11, but he kept averaging like 4 targets per game throughout those first 3 weeks. And he had 11.8 fantasy points and a half PPR, 28 and then 16.7. Since then, though, that Baltimore Ravens game, that was just a terrible game for James Cook because the Bills got killed in that game, and James Cook was taking on the strength of the Baltimore Ravens defense. Their run defense is really freaking good. James Cook, 5.3 fantasy points in that game. 16.9 fantasy points in that game versus Houston, but a lot of that second half, he got taken out of the game. And then he misses week 6, but then he comes back week 7, and 9.2 fantasy points in that game versus Tennessee is just simply not very good. I mean, especially when you consider that his week was entirely saved by a touchdown. 12 carries for 32 yards is what he did against Tennessee. It was bad. I mean, it just wasn't very good. The concern for people is the attempts, the rushing attempts. I think that Buffalo is going through a unique time offensively. They just traded for Amari Cooper, so they're trying to get that whole offense to gel together and to mesh. James Cook's not going anywhere. This is still the most important playmaker that they have on offense right here. This is their guy. So over the next month, until their bye week, he's got Seattle, Miami, Indianapolis, and Kansas City. 3 out of the 4, with the exception of Kansas City, great opportunities for James Cook to go off in those games. Absolute fantastic opportunities. So I think that James Cook is a great guy to buy right now. Try to get someone like a Bijan Robinson. I know. I would trade Bijan for James Cook if I could get additional assets like another flex or a wide receiver too, in addition to getting James Cook. I would also be willing to send a guy like Aaron Jones for James Cook. If it took it straight up, I would definitely do that. But especially if I could get another piece on top of it, like a flex option, that makes a lot of sense to me. James Cook's not going anywhere. This offense is really good. And once they finally start clicking with the new piece they got, Amari Cooper, James Cook, everyone's going to remember that this is the most important asset on their entire offense. And listen, I'm not an NBA guy, but I don't live under a rock. I know that LeBron James is going to be able to get more than 0.5 total points, and that is what his projection is right now on Underdog. So if you want to get in on the NBA season and you haven't taken advantage of Underdog yet, this is the perfect time to do it. Go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, use code FFN to sign up for Underdog and to play this LeBron James sweat-free projection. They'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 of bonus cash, and you'll be able to play this LeBron James sweat-free projection this week. And then the last guy I want to talk about today. I called this guy a must-start this week, and it did not work out. We'll talk about it on the What I Got Right and Wrong live stream. Devonte Adams of the New York Jets, I believe, is a great buy low. So this one obviously predates to this past week. When he gets sent over to the New York Jets, I'm talking with a lot of people that day. YouTube comments are coming in. I'm seeing people on X talk. Seemed to me like the majority of people were in on Garrett Wilson. They thought Garrett Wilson was going to be the primary beneficiary in this offense. And listen, Garrett Wilson had a better game in fantasy against the Steelers than Devonte Adams did. But let's just break it down at a more basic level. Like when you watch those two guys on the football field, first of all, who is getting the majority of the targets on Sunday night. So Garrett Wilson gets 9 targets on Sunday night. Very good number. Drops some key balls, which Aaron Rodgers does not like. And if you have any doubt at this point whether Aaron's running this team or not, I really don't know what to tell you. This team is Aaron Rodgers' team to a freaking T. And Devonte Adams gets 9 targets as well, but he only capitalizes on 3 out of 30 receptions here. Now, he dropped a pass early in that game. The first target of the game actually went to Devonte, and it was a bad throw by Aaron. But here's my point in all this. Aaron Rodgers, when you watch that game on Sunday night, I want people to go back and watch this game because a lot of those possession receiver targets, all the catches and all the targets that Aaron Rodgers was relying on someone to catch, he was going to Devonte Adams. A lot of those short, quick throws where Devonte Adams was tasked with just settling in to the zone of the soft spot of the defense, that's what Devonte Adams was doing for Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was finding him. Garrett Wilson dropping 2 passes last night, that's a big deal to Aaron Rodgers here. And I'm telling you, that will matter. And it will definitely become a problem here for Garrett Wilson here soon. I'm not saying Garrett Wilson is irrelevant in this offense. Obviously, he's going to be relevant. This is a great wide receiver still. But Devonte Adams is Aaron Rodgers' guy. And at this point, honestly, there's a lot of people who are wondering if Devonte Adams is a wide receiver too, a high-end wide receiver too. This, to me, is the perfect opportunity to come in with a similar trade offer to Devonta Smith, Michael Pittman Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba, plus maybe another flex option, Tyler Lockett, Wan'Dale Robinson, or even George Pickens off the big game. I think you could get away with this right here. Devonte Adams, people are not sure about what to expect from him because, again, it predates to last week. A lot of people thought that coming out of this trade, it was going to be Garrett Wilson who benefits. I see people's point on it. Obviously, he had a better game. I still believe it's going to be Devonte Adams in the long run. That's why I think he's a buy low opportunity this week. So let me know how your team did in week 7. If you want to see the biggest waiver wire pickups to get for week 8, click on this video right here.